Mexico is often described as one of the most affordable places to live: warm climate, lower rents, inexpensive food, and a lifestyle that seems attainable on a modest budget. For many visitors and remote workers, the numbers appear convincing. Apartments cost a fraction of prices in major U.S. or European cities. Eating out is affordable. Services are accessible. But affordability depends on perspective. Mexico's cost of living cannot be separated from local wage levels. While some newcomers earn in foreign currencies, the average Mexican salary operates within a very different economic framework. Housing prices in certain cities have risen. Urban and regional differences are significant. Daily expenses, from transportation to healthcare to groceries, tell a more nuanced story than broad comparisons suggest. So the real question is not whether Mexico is cheap. It is, cheap for whom? To understand that, we have to look beyond perception and examine income data, living costs, and the realities of everyday life for both locals and expatriates. This is World Gap, an interesting channel about life in other countries. Subscribe. Today you're going to find out why Mexico is called cheap, and why that word can be completely misleading. How many hours does an average Mexican actually need to work to afford a one-bedroom apartment in Mexico City? What happens when rent prices rise faster than salaries? Why can two people live in the same city and experience completely different realities? And how does earning in dollars change everything? By the end of this video, you'll understand whether Mexico is truly affordable, or if the idea of cheap living only works for a small group of people. Mexico covers nearly 2 million square kilometers, making it one of the largest countries in the world by land area. Its geography ranges from northern deserts and industrial border corridors to high-altitude central plateaus and tropical southern coastlines. This physical scale matters, because it shapes how people live, where they work, and how money circulates. Mexico is not organized around a single dominant coastal strip or one economic center. It is a country of regions, and those regions function differently. Roughly 130 million people live in Mexico, and the majority are concentrated in urban areas. The Central Highlands form the demographic core. The metropolitan area of Mexico City alone accounts for more than 20 million people, making it one of the largest urban concentrations in the Western Hemisphere. Surrounding states, Estado de Mexico, Puebla, Hidalgo, Querétaro, are tightly integrated into this central corridor. Further west, Guadalajara anchors the Bajío region, a manufacturing and technology hub. In the north, Monterrey operates as an industrial powerhouse with deep connections to cross-border trade. These urban centers form the backbone of Mexico's formal economy. Economic activity follows infrastructure and proximity to markets. Northern states such as Nuevo León, Chihuahua, and Baja California are heavily linked to export manufacturing and logistics due to their access to the United States. The Bajío region, Querétaro, Guanajuato, Aguascalientes, has become a major site for automotive and aerospace production. Mexico City remains the financial and administrative center, concentrating corporate headquarters, professional services, and higher-paying knowledge sector jobs. In these areas, wages are generally higher, but so are housing costs and everyday expenses. Beyond these primary hubs are secondary cities that rarely appear in international conversations. Places like León, Mérida, Toluca, San Luis Potosí, and Veracruz each have populations in the hundreds of thousands or more. They function as regional capitals, providing employment in manufacturing, education, retail, and public administration. For most Mexicans, daily life unfolds in these cities or in surrounding suburban municipalities. Housing is typically located away from historic centers and tourist districts, in dense residential neighborhoods built around local schools, public transit routes, and informal commerce. These areas are structurally different from the neighborhoods frequently shown in international media. Foreign residents and expatriates tend to concentrate in a limited number of locations. Mexico City attracts remote workers and professionals seeking urban infrastructure and connectivity. Guadalajara offers a growing technology sector and a lower cost profile compared to the capital. Along the Caribbean coast, Playa del Carmen, and Tulum have become visible hubs for international residents, particularly those earning in foreign currencies. These zones represent a very small geographic portion of the country, yet they shape much of the external perception of Mexico's affordability. The contrast between these enclaves and everyday residential districts is substantial. In coastal tourist zones, rental prices are often denominated in dollars or indexed to international demand. Restaurants, co-working spaces, and new apartment developments cater to a global clientele. Meanwhile, in working-class neighborhoods outside the tourist corridor, rents are negotiated in pesos and reflect local wage levels. Housing may be smaller, infrastructure more basic, and services locally oriented rather than internationally branded. These two environments can exist within the same municipality but operate under different economic dynamics. Urban versus regional differences further complicate the picture. In major metropolitan areas, access to public transportation, hospitals, universities, and diversified employment creates economic mobility but also drives up living costs. In smaller towns and rural areas, housing may be cheaper, but formal job opportunities are limited. Many households in these regions rely on informal work, remittances, or seasonal employment. The cost of living is lower in nominal terms, but so are incomes. Affordability cannot be measured without understanding both sides of that equation. Geography also influences infrastructure quality. Northern industrial states often benefit from higher investment per capita, stronger logistics networks, and closer integration with export markets. Southern states such as Oaxaca, Chiapas, and Guerrero have historically experienced lower levels of industrialization and income. These differences are visible in wage data, employment patterns, and public services. A national average obscures these contrasts. What emerges is not a single Mexico, but multiple economic landscapes operating simultaneously. A software engineer in Mexico City, a factory worker in Monterrey, a hotel employee in Playa del Carmen, and a shop owner in a secondary inland city all face distinct cost structures and income possibilities. Housing markets, transportation systems, and consumer prices vary accordingly. When observers describe Mexico as cheap, they are often referencing one specific slice of this geography rather than the broader national reality. Understanding where people actually live, and where economic power is concentrated, is essential before discussing cost of living. Geography determines access to opportunity, shapes salary levels, and defines what everyday expenses look like across regions. To assess affordability in a meaningful way, the next step is to examine the numbers themselves: wages, household income, and how they compare to the real cost of living across these different parts of the country. Mexico is the second largest economy in Latin America and consistently ranks among the top 15 economies in the world by gross domestic product. In recent years, its GDP has fluctuated around 1.4 to 1.8 trillion US, depending on exchange rates and global conditions. That figure reflects the total value of goods and services produced across a nation of roughly 130 million people. On paper, it places Mexico alongside major industrial economies and positions it as a central player in North American supply chains. But aggregate GDP does not describe how income is distributed, nor does it explain what daily life feels like for most households. When that national output is divided across the population, Mexico's GDP per capita is significantly lower than that of the United States or Western Europe. The economy is large, diversified, and globally integrated, yet average purchasing power remains constrained relative to many developed nations. But aggregate GDP does not describe how income is distributed, nor does it explain what daily life feels like for most households. When that national output is divided across the population, Mexico's GDP per capita is significantly lower than that of the United States or Western Europe. The economy is large, diversified, and globally integrated, yet average purchasing power remains constrained relative to many developed nations. To understand affordability, income levels are the starting point. Formal wage data shows that the average monthly salary for registered workers typically ranges between 14,000 and 18,000 Mexican pesos before taxes, depending on sector and region. At recent exchange rates, that translates roughly to 800 to 1,000 US dollars per month. However, this average masks considerable variation. High-skilled professionals in finance, engineering, or multinational firms may earn substantially more, particularly in Mexico City or Monterrey. At the same time, many workers earn significantly less, especially in retail, hospitality, agriculture, and informal employment. Income distribution in Mexico is uneven. A relatively small segment of the workforce earns wages comparable to international standards, while a large portion operates near or below the national median. The median salary is often lower than the average, meaning that more than half of workers earn below the headline figure. In practical terms, this means that while some households experience middle-class purchasing power, many operate within tighter financial margins. Minimum wage provides another important benchmark. As of recent adjustments, the general daily minimum wage in most of the country is just over 240 pesos per day. In border regions, it is higher, reflecting economic integration with the United States. Using the general rate, a full-time worker earning minimum wage would receive approximately 7,200 pesos per month before deductions, or around 400 US dollars at current exchange rates. Secondary cities present a different picture, though not necessarily a simple one. In Guadalajara, rental prices for comparable apartments may range between 8,000 and 14,000 pesos depending on location. In cities such as León or Mérida, rents can fall closer to 6,000 to 10,000 pesos for standard residential units. These figures are lower than in Mexico City but still significant relative to average wages. A worker earning 15,000 pesos per month in a secondary city might spend 40 to 60% of income on rent, depending on neighborhood and housing type. For minimum wage earners, even these lower rents represent a substantial share of income. Housing pressure is only one part of the broader economic structure. Mexico's economy is anchored by several major sectors. Manufacturing is central, particularly export-oriented production. Automotive assembly, aerospace components, electronics, and machinery are deeply integrated into North American supply chains. Industrial corridors in the north and central regions generate significant export revenue and provide relatively stable employment. These jobs often pay above minimum wage but still operate within national salary norms rather than global standards. Tourism is another visible sector, contributing billions of dollars annually and supporting millions of jobs. However, many tourism-related positions are seasonal or service-based, with wage levels that reflect domestic labor markets rather than international visitor spending. Remittances form an additional pillar. Money sent home by Mexicans working abroad, particularly in the United States, now represents one of the country's largest sources of foreign currency inflow. For many households, remittances supplement low local wages and stabilize consumption. The services sector, including retail, transportation, education, and healthcare, employs a large share of the workforce. Alongside it operates a substantial informal economy. A significant percentage of workers are employed without formal contracts or social security benefits. Informal employment can provide flexibility but often limits income stability and access to financial services. Poverty statistics provide additional context. Depending on measurement criteria, roughly 1/3 to 2/5 of Mexico's population lives below the national poverty line. In the Mexican framework, poverty is defined not only by income but also by access to essential services such as healthcare, education, housing quality, and food security. This multidimensional measure highlights that economic vulnerability extends beyond wages alone. When viewed together, these data points reveal a structural tension. Mexico's economy is large and globally connected. It produces cars, electronics, agricultural exports, and services for international markets. Yet average wages remain modest relative to housing costs in major urban centers. In cities experiencing strong domestic and foreign demand, rents have risen faster than local incomes. For households earning near the median or minimum wage, housing often consumes a disproportionate share of earnings. This imbalance does not affect all regions equally, nor all professions. Skilled workers in export manufacturing or corporate services may maintain comfortable margins. Dual-income households can distribute costs more effectively. But for many single earners, especially in high-demand urban zones, affordability is constrained by the relationship between wages and rent. Understanding this dynamic is essential before assessing everyday expenses such as food, transportation, healthcare, and utilities. Housing is typically the largest fixed cost in any household budget. If rent already absorbs half of monthly income, even relatively inexpensive groceries or transportation will not fully offset the pressure. To evaluate whether Mexico is truly affordable, we now need to move beyond wages and examine the full structure of monthly living costs, and how they compare to the incomes we have just outlined. The phrase, low cost of living, is often used to describe Mexico. But cost only becomes meaningful when broken down into specific monthly expenses. Rent, utilities, food, transportation, these are the categories that determine whether life feels affordable or constrained. And as with income, the numbers vary significantly depending on geography and housing choice. Housing is the largest expense for most households. In Mexico City, rental prices are highly sensitive to location. In central, high-demand neighborhoods with strong commercial infrastructure and international visibility, a modest one-bedroom apartment commonly ranges between 15,000 and 25,000 pesos per month. In newly renovated buildings or areas with strong foreign demand, prices can exceed that range. These districts tend to have better walkability, proximity to offices and co-working spaces, and a larger supply of furnished units, which increases price levels. Move away from the historic and commercial core toward middle-income or peripheral neighborhoods, and rents decrease. In these districts, a one-bedroom apartment may range between 8,000 and 14,000 pesos per month depending on building quality and transit access. Units are often unfurnished, and amenities are simpler. The difference reflects not only distance from the center but also purchasing power of local residents. In secondary cities such as Guadalajara, Mérida, or Leon, rents are generally lower than in Mexico City's prime areas but still substantial relative to local wages. A comparable one-bedroom apartment in a middle-income area may cost between 7,000 and 12,000 pesos per month. In higher demand zones within these cities, especially where there is international presence or new development, rents may approach 14,000 or more. The gap between central Mexico City and secondary cities is visible, but not dramatic when measured against salary levels. Utilities form the next layer of fixed costs. Electricity bills vary based on climate and consumption. In temperate central regions, a single person may pay between 300 and 700 pesos per month. In hotter coastal areas where air conditioning is common, electricity can exceed 1,000 pesos during peak months. Water charges are typically modest, often between 150 and 300 pesos monthly in urban areas. Cooking gas, whether through pipeline service or refill tanks, can add 300 to 600 pesos per month depending on usage. Home internet service generally ranges from 400 to 700 pesos monthly for standard speeds. A mobile phone plan with data may cost between 200 and 400 pesos per month. Combined, utilities and connectivity for one person typically fall between 1,500 and 2,500 pesos monthly in central regions, somewhat higher in hotter climates. Food expenses depend heavily on purchasing habits. A basic grocery basket for one person, including staples such as rice, beans, eggs, poultry, vegetables, tortillas, and fruit, can cost between 2,500 and 4,000 pesos per month when purchased primarily from local markets and neighborhood shops. Supermarkets tend to be more expensive, particularly for imported or packaged goods. Processed and specialty products significantly raise monthly totals. For households that rely heavily on supermarkets and convenience stores, food costs can move toward 4,000 to 5,000 pesos monthly even for one person. Eating out is relatively affordable in nominal terms. A simple local meal in a small restaurant or lunch counter often costs between 90 and 150 pesos. A mid-range restaurant meal may range from 250 to 400 pesos per person, depending on city and neighborhood. These prices appear low when compared internationally. However, frequency matters. For someone earning 15,000 pesos per month, regular dining in mid-range establishments would represent a noticeable share of income. Transportation costs vary by city structure. In Mexico City, public transportation remains inexpensive. Metro and bus fares are low on a per-ride basis, and a monthly commuting budget may fall between 400 and 800 pesos depending on distance and mode combinations. In secondary cities with less extensive transit networks, reliance on buses or informal transport can increase costs slightly but remains relatively affordable. Car ownership changes the equation. Fuel prices fluctuate but can result in monthly fuel costs between 2,000 and 4,000 pesos depending on commuting distance. Insurance, maintenance, and registration add further expense. Ride-sharing services are widely available in major cities. Short trips may cost 80 to 150 pesos, with longer cross-city trips rising significantly. Frequent use quickly increases monthly transport spending. To understand how these numbers function in practice, it helps to construct two simplified monthly budgets. Consider an individual earning 15,000 pesos per month, roughly aligned with the national average for formal employment. Suppose this person rents a modest one-bedroom apartment in a middle-income neighborhood in Mexico City for 10,000 pesos. Utilities and internet total 2,000 pesos. Groceries cost 3,000 pesos. Public transportation adds 600 pesos. Even without including clothing, healthcare, personal items, or unexpected expenses, the total already reaches approximately 15,600 pesos. The individual would need to reduce rent by sharing housing, cut discretionary spending, or supplement income to maintain balance. If rent were lower, for example 8,000 pesos in a more peripheral area, the monthly total would still approach 13,600 pesos, leaving limited disposable income. Occasional restaurant meals or entertainment would narrow that margin further. Now consider a second individual earning $2,500 per month remotely. At an exchange rate near 17 pesos per dollar, this equals approximately 42,500 pesos monthly. If this person rents in a central Mexico City neighborhood for 18,000 pesos, pays 2,500 pesos in utilities, spends 4,000 pesos on groceries, and 2,000 pesos on transportation and dining combined, total core expenses might reach 26,500 pesos. That leaves roughly 16,000 pesos remaining for savings, travel, healthcare, or discretionary spending. The same price environment produces a very different financial outcome because income is anchored in a stronger currency. This comparison illustrates a structural reality. Mexico's prices are moderate in international terms, but they are calibrated to domestic wage levels that remain relatively low. When income originates outside the local labor market, purchasing power expands significantly. When income is earned within it, housing often absorbs a large portion of earnings. Affordability therefore depends less on whether a meal costs 120 pesos or whether internet costs 500 pesos, and more on the relationship between wages and fixed costs. Rent, as the dominant expense, determines whether other categories feel manageable or restrictive. In cities where demand from higher-income residents increases housing prices, local wage growth does not always keep pace. At the same time, Mexico does retain cost advantages in certain areas. Public transportation remains inexpensive relative to many countries. Basic food staples are accessible. Utility prices, outside of heavy electricity usage, are moderate. These factors help stabilize household budgets. But they do not fully offset housing pressures in major urban centers. The result is not a simple narrative of cheap or expensive. It is a layered economic environment in which identical prices create different realities depending on income source, household size, and city. For some residents, the cost structure allows comfortable living with room for savings. For others, especially single earners near the median salary in high-demand urban areas, monthly budgets require careful management. Understanding these numbers clarifies the central question. Mexico's cost of living cannot be evaluated in isolation. It must be measured against earnings, stability of employment, and long-term financial security. To complete the picture, we now need to examine how healthcare, public services, and broader social conditions intersect with these economic constraints, and how they influence the overall quality of life beyond the monthly spreadsheet. Two people can stand in the same neighborhood, pay the same price for rent, groceries, and transportation, and experience entirely different standards of living. The difference is not cultural. It is not personal. It is structural. It begins with the currency in which income is earned. When income is denominated in US dollars or another stronger foreign currency, its conversion into pesos creates a multiplier effect. A salary of $2,500 per month, once converted, becomes more than 40,000 pesos. That figure sits well above Mexico's average formal wage. It immediately expands the range of available housing, services, and discretionary consumption. The same apartment that might represent 60% of a local worker's income may represent 30 or 40% of a dollar-based earner's budget. The price is identical. The financial burden is not. Purchasing power is not simply about exchange rates. It is about relative wage levels. Mexico's domestic labor market sets compensation according to local productivity, sector conditions, and historical income structures. Even in high-skilled professions, salaries often remain below North American or Western European equivalents. When someone earns externally and spends internally, they are operating across two economic systems simultaneously. That gap shapes consumption patterns and housing decisions. In high-demand districts of Mexico City, Guadalajara, and certain coastal urban centers, this dynamic becomes visible in real estate. Neighborhoods that were historically middle-income have seen renovation cycles, new apartment developments, and rising rental prices. Investors respond to demand. Developers build for tenants who can afford higher monthly payments. When a segment of residents arrives with greater purchasing power, landlords adjust price expectations accordingly. This is not a coordinated shift, it is a response to market signals. As rents increase in these districts, the composition of residents gradually changes. Units are remodeled. Furnished apartments become more common. Short-term rental markets expand. Amenities such as co-working spaces, boutique fitness studios, and specialty retail appear in response to new spending capacity. Over time, price structures in these areas begin to reflect the higher income segment rather than the median local wage. This process creates segmentation within the rental market. Some properties remain aligned with local wage levels, often located in peripheral neighborhoods or older buildings with fewer amenities. These units are priced in pesos and negotiated within the domestic labor market context. At the same time, a parallel segment develops in high-demand districts where rents may be informally indexed to international demand. In certain neighborhoods, contracts may be denominated in dollars or adjusted to reflect foreign tenant expectations. The same city now contains multiple rental tiers operating under different price logics. For residents earning in pesos, rising rents in central districts can outpace wage growth. Mexico has experienced steady minimum wage increases in recent years, but overall salary growth in many sectors remains moderate relative to housing appreciation in prime areas. When rent absorbs a growing share of income, households adjust by relocating further from central districts, sharing apartments, or reducing discretionary spending. Housing decisions become strategic calculations around commute time, safety perception, and budget stability. For those earning in foreign currency, the calculation differs. A central apartment priced at 18,000 pesos may feel comparable to mid-range rent in a smaller North American city. The same resident may allocate additional funds toward private healthcare plans, international schools, or premium services without exceeding comfortable budget thresholds. Dining out several times per week, using ride-sharing regularly, or maintaining gym memberships and co-working subscriptions becomes manageable within monthly income. These differences accumulate over time. Access to private healthcare reduces wait times and expands provider choice. Enrollment in private education, where relevant, creates alternative academic pathways. Regular use of premium services alters daily routines. None of these decisions are inherently excessive or unusual. They reflect available income. But they create divergence in lived experience within the same metropolitan environment. Savings capacity further amplifies the gap. A local professional earning 15,000 to 20,000 pesos per month may have limited ability to accumulate long-term savings after rent and essential expenses. Emergency funds grow slowly. Property ownership becomes difficult in high-demand areas. In contrast, a resident earning the equivalent of 40,000 or 50,000 pesos per month may allocate a substantial portion towards savings or investment even after covering higher-end rent. Over several years, this difference compounds. The divergence is not about lifestyle preferences. It is about structural incentives and constraints. Local workers operate within a labor market shaped by domestic wage standards. Their career progression depends on sector growth, education access, and company structures within Mexico. Foreign earners, particularly remote workers, are less dependent on local wage conditions. Their income trajectory may follow entirely different economic cycles. This dual structure means that identical prices carry different meanings. A 300 peso dinner may represent a minor expense for someone earning in dollars, but a discretionary treat for someone earning near the national median. A 20,000 peso apartment may feel attainable for one household and out of reach for another, even though both exist within the same building. The broader housing market reflects these realities. Developers prioritize projects where demand signals are strongest. Financial institutions extend credit based on projected rental returns. As certain neighborhoods attract higher-income tenants, supply shifts accordingly. Meanwhile, more affordable housing supply often expands in peripheral zones where land is cheaper but commute times are longer. Infrastructure quality, transit connectivity, and service availability vary across these urban layers. It is important to emphasize that this dynamic does not result from individual intent. No single renter determines market direction. Price adjustments occur through aggregate demand and capital allocation. The currency gap simply magnifies purchasing power differences that already exist within global income hierarchies. The consequence is that Mexico's major cities increasingly contain parallel economic realities. In one reality, households manage tight monthly budgets, prioritize proximity to work, and make incremental financial decisions within constrained margins. In another, residents access premium housing, international services, and greater financial flexibility while spending within the same national price system. These realities intersect physically but remain economically distinct. They share public roads, supermarkets, and transit systems, yet operate under different income baselines. When observers describe Mexico as affordable, they often reference the experience of those whose income originates outside the local wage structure. When locals assess affordability, they measure costs against domestic salary levels. Understanding this divergence clarifies why broad statements about cost of living can mislead. Prices alone do not define affordability. Income source, currency strength, and wage growth trajectories determine how sustainable those prices feel over time. To fully evaluate quality of life, the analysis must now extend beyond budgets and rent levels. Healthcare access, public infrastructure, safety conditions, and long-term economic mobility shape daily experience just as much as purchasing power. The next section examines how these broader factors influence life within Mexico's layered economic landscape. Healthcare and safety are often discussed separately from cost of living, yet both directly influence how affordable and sustainable daily life feels over time. Access, quality, and reliability shape long-term financial stability as much as rent or groceries. Mexico's public healthcare system is structured around employment status. Workers formally employed and registered with Social Security institutions receive coverage through national systems that provide hospital care, primary care clinics, and certain medications. Contributions are deducted from payroll, meaning formally employed workers gain access as part of their labor benefits. For individuals outside the formal labor market, including informal workers or unemployed populations, separate public programs provide more limited coverage depending on eligibility and regional resources. In practice, public health care significantly reduces direct out-of-pocket expenses for large segments of the population. Consultations, hospitalizations, and essential treatments are subsidized or fully covered for those enrolled. However, service quality and wait times vary by region and facility capacity. In densely populated urban centers, demand can exceed supply, resulting in longer waits for specialist appointments or elective procedures. In smaller cities and rural areas, infrastructure may be more limited, requiring travel to larger regional hospitals for advanced treatment. This variability does not imply systemic absence of care, but it does create uneven access. Public hospitals in major metropolitan areas often provide complex procedures and specialized treatment, while local clinics handle primary care. The experience depends on city, administrative efficiency, and available funding. For many households earning in pesos, the public system functions as the primary safeguard against catastrophic medical expenses. Alongside the public system operates a substantial private healthcare sector. In large cities such as Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Monterrey, private hospitals and clinics are widely available. They range from small neighborhood practices to large, modern medical centers equipped with advanced diagnostic technology. Consultation fees in private clinics are generally accessible in nominal terms. A general practitioner visit may cost between 600 and 1,200 pesos. Specialist consultations often range from 1,200 to 2,500 pesos, depending on the field and city. Diagnostic tests and procedures are priced separately, and hospital stays can become expensive without insurance. Compared to private healthcare costs in the United States or parts of Europe, these fees appear moderate. However, relative to Mexico's average monthly wage, repeated private consultations represent a meaningful expense. For a worker earning 15,000 pesos per month, several specialist visits and laboratory tests can consume a significant portion of income. As a result, many peso-earning households rely primarily on public health care for major needs while using private clinics selectively for faster access or convenience when financially possible. Higher-income residents, including those earning in foreign currencies, often choose private healthcare as their default option. The cost difference represents a smaller share of their monthly budget. Private insurance plans are also available and commonly used by middle and upper-income households. This creates a layered healthcare experience. Public care provides broad coverage, while private services offer shorter wait times, additional amenities, and greater provider choice for those able to pay. Affordability therefore operates on two levels. Public healthcare reduces direct medical expenses for millions of residents and prevents healthcare from becoming an immediate financial crisis. At the same time, access to private care expands with income. The structural difference between peso-based earnings and higher foreign currency income appears again in healthcare decisions. Identical consultation prices represent different financial weights depending on salary baseline. Safety presents a similarly layered reality. Crime rates in Mexico vary significantly by state, municipality, and even neighborhood. National statistics capture aggregate trends, but they conceal regional differences. Some states and urban areas report higher rates of certain crimes, while others maintain lower rates comparable to many cities internationally. Large metropolitan areas contain districts with distinct safety profiles, often shaped by economic conditions, infrastructure, and local governance capacity. For most residents in stable middle-income neighborhoods, daily life follows routine patterns: commuting, school attendance, commerce, and social activity. Public spaces, transportation systems, and commercial districts function normally in many areas. At the same time, security considerations influence housing and mobility decisions. Households assess neighborhood characteristics carefully before renting or purchasing property. This evaluation contributes to urban segmentation. Gated communities, controlled access apartment buildings, and residential complexes with private security have become common in many cities. These features add cost. Maintenance fees for buildings with controlled entry, guards, or surveillance systems increase monthly housing expenses. In certain districts, security infrastructure becomes part of the value proposition, reflected in higher rents or purchase prices. Peripheral neighborhoods with lower rents may offer fewer security amenities or less infrastructure investment. Conversely, central districts with higher prices often benefit from stronger lighting, commercial activity, and police presence, which influence perception and market demand. The relationship between safety and housing cost is therefore structural rather than emotional. Households allocate income toward perceived stability when possible. Perception itself plays a role. International media coverage can create generalized impressions that do not fully reflect regional variation. Conversely, local residents often develop nuanced understandings of which areas are considered stable and which require caution. Statistical reality and personal experience do not always align neatly. What remains consistent is that safety considerations influence real estate markets, commuting patterns, and lifestyle choices. For higher-income households, including foreign earners, security-related costs are typically absorbed more easily. Renting in buildings with controlled access or choosing neighborhoods with established infrastructure represents a manageable budget item. For households earning near the median wage, these same features may represent a financial stretch, pushing them toward more affordable but less serviced areas. Healthcare and safety together demonstrate how public systems and private options coexist within Mexico's urban framework. Public healthcare provides a foundational safety net, while private care expands options for those with higher incomes. Safety conditions vary by region, influencing housing segmentation and cost structures. In both cases, income level determines how comfortably households navigate available choices. Understanding these dynamics helps move beyond simplistic assessments of affordability. Cost of living is not only about prices, but about the systems that support daily life and the financial flexibility to respond to uncertainty. To conclude the broader analysis, the final section will examine how these economic, healthcare, and safety structures combine to shape overall quality of life, and what they reveal about the original question of affordability. Pros and cons. When examining Mexico's affordability, it becomes clear that cost of living cannot be separated from income structure, public systems, and regional variation. Prices alone do not define quality of life. They interact with wages, infrastructure, healthcare access, and housing markets. The result is a layered economic environment with both structural advantages and structural limitations. On the advantage side, Mexico offers significant geographic and climatic diversity. From temperate highland cities to coastal regions and industrial northern corridors, households can choose between distinct environments within a single national economy. This diversity supports varied economic activity and allows different urban models to develop. It also means that living conditions are not uniform. Climate influences utility costs, transportation patterns, and even housing design. Daily consumer costs remain moderate in many categories. Basic food staples, local transportation, and essential services are priced within reach of much of the population. Public transportation systems, particularly in large cities, offer affordable commuting options relative to many international benchmarks. For households managing tight budgets, this reduces the burden of mobility. Utility prices, while variable by region, are not structurally prohibitive in most temperate urban areas. Mexico also maintains strong community-based social networks. Extended family structures, neighborhood-level commerce, and informal support systems play a meaningful role in economic resilience. These networks are not easily quantified in monetary terms, but they influence household stability and consumption patterns. Public healthcare, despite variability in quality and wait times, provides a broad safety net that limits catastrophic medical costs for millions of residents. Access is not uniform, yet the existence of a national coverage structure reduces financial exposure compared to systems without universal components. At the same time, structural limitations are evident. Average wages remain modest relative to housing costs in high-demand urban centers. In Mexico City and certain secondary cities experiencing growth, rent has risen faster than median income. This creates pressure on single earners and young professionals attempting to live near employment hubs. Shared housing, peripheral commuting, and delayed home ownership become common adaptations. Income inequality contributes to segmented purchasing power. A portion of the population earns at levels that support comfortable urban living, access to private healthcare, and discretionary consumption. A larger share operates closer to median or minimum wage levels, where housing absorbs a significant portion of income. The coexistence of these tiers within the same metropolitan areas produces parallel economic realities. Infrastructure quality varies between regions. Industrial northern states and major metropolitan centers often benefit from stronger logistics networks, investment flows, and service availability. In contrast, smaller cities and rural areas may face constraints in healthcare facilities, public services, and employment diversification. These differences influence long-term mobility and opportunity. Urban segmentation reflects these income divisions. Gated residential complexes, renovated central districts, and high-rise developments operate alongside older neighborhoods and peripheral housing expansions. Price levels differ accordingly. Access to certain amenities becomes correlated with income. The segmentation is not ideological, it is market-driven. Capital flows toward areas where higher returns are expected, and development patterns follow purchasing power. Upward mobility, while present in dynamic sectors such as export manufacturing and technology, can be limited in lower-wage industries. Career progression in retail, hospitality, or informal employment may not translate into substantial wage growth. Educational attainment and sector placement significantly shape income trajectory. This reinforces the importance of labor market positioning in determining long-term affordability. Taken together, these elements complicate the narrative. Mexico is neither uniformly inexpensive nor broadly unaffordable. It operates within a global economic system where exchange rates, trade integration, and cross-border income flows influence domestic markets. For individuals earning within the local wage structure, affordability depends heavily on housing choices, household size, and regional location. For those earning in stronger foreign currencies, purchasing power expands, altering the cost equation even when prices remain the same. The country's strengths lie in its diversified economy, accessible daily consumer costs, extensive urban networks, and public safety nets that moderate extreme financial risk. Its constraints emerge from wage distribution, regional inequality, and the growing divergence between income tiers in major cities. Affordability, therefore, is not a fixed characteristic of Mexico as a country. It is a function of income source, geographic context, and access to opportunity. Two households may share the same street address and yet experience fundamentally different financial realities because their earnings originate in different economic systems. Understanding this layered structure provides a more accurate answer to the initial question. Mexico cannot be reduced to a single price comparison or a simplified ranking among nations. Its cost of living is shaped by internal wage dynamics and external capital flows, by local labor markets and global demand. In the end, the meaning of cheap or expensive depends less on headline prices and more on the relationship between income and obligation. And that relationship, more than any individual expense, determines how life is experienced within Mexico's complex economic landscape.